Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. This is All-Star Superboy, Chapter 2. And joining me to discuss the first Superboy run by Carl Kesel and Tom Grummett is our pal from All Yeah Comics Skokie, sweet Bernie Gersmeyer. Welcome back.
Good evening, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. Carl Kesel. I always keep forgetting that that's how you pronounce his last name. I was for years I was going Kesel, and then I remembered you said that. Yeah.
That is how I've heard it in other interviews, so that's the pronunciation I've gone with. Hey, while we're just talking words here, I had never really encountered the word hearst as a euphemism for getting killed before, and I certainly never encountered it with the frequency that I did in reading these 30 issues. Why, if one were to make a drinking game out of it, you would in fact be hearsed by the end of it. You know what I mean?
Oh gosh, we're really starting this way. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Let's jump in. What do you want to do? Where do you want to start with this run, buddy?
So we are referring to the Superboy solo series that launched in 1994 following Reign of the Superman under the banner Reign of Tomorrow. I mentioned this at the end of our last episode. I was like, I think they just used it in the house ads, forgetting like a dum-dum that it's right there on the front cover of the first issue, Reign of Tomorrow. But so this was a series that launched in 94. It ran for exactly 100 issues. And Kesel and Grummett had two runs. They did the first 30 issues, then they went away for a bit. I know Kesel wrote the Superboy and the Ravers series, which, as another correction to last week's episode, I kept calling them the Ravagers. And then as I was listening back to it, I'm like, God damn it, the Ravers.
Yeah, they're partiers, man.
Yeah. But then they would return for another run from issues 50 through 79. Then Joe Kelly, our pal Joe Kelly from Action Comics, and Pasquale Ferry, they would do an 11-issue run. And then the final like half a dozen issues were by Jimmy Palmiotti, Dan DiDio, and John McCrae. And that's where they repositioned Superboy as a landlord or superintendent of an apartment building. It was an odd end for the series. And over the course of these next two episodes, we're going to be talking about all of it. But for this episode, we're focusing on issues 1 through 30, that first Kesel Grummett run. Oh. And the first thing I want to say, this had been a gap of mine until now. I had never read this. I jumped on board this series with the hypertension arc that started at or around issue 60, because I was coming out of The Kingdom and all the business about hyper time, and I was like, what's this about? So that's when I started reading. Yeah, we talked about that in one of our previous episodes.
And we did that, and then because you talked about it, I don't know did we talk about those Superboy issues in that episode, or I feel like you made me want to read them. I feel like one of those two things happened.
Yeah, that hypertension arc has come up a couple of times, so it might have been that one and another one.
It's good. I forget offhand. I kind of liked it.
Yeah, it was great. It made me a fan of the series. It made me a regular reader of it, but I had never read these early issues, and frustratingly, they have not been collected. There was one trade that DC put out a few years ago now called Trouble in Paradise that collected 0 and 1 through 10, but they never followed up with subsequent volumes. But to DC's credit, the entire series is on the app except for issue 100. Everything is there except the goddamn final issue. And I couldn't tell you why.
That's hilarious.
So I've had access to them for a while, but I didn't get to them. And then, of course, this became the perfect opportunity. But, I mean, do you remember when this was first coming out? Was this something that appealed to you at all? Like, why did you not jump on board with this back in the day at the time?
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. Well, after now reading them, I maybe now understand why I didn't necessarily keep going. I know for a fact that I bought issues 1 and issues 2 because I just recently, I think, got rid of issue 1. I love that cover. It's a fun cover. It's just a great looking cover. And I think I had 2, and I'm pretty sure I just didn't enjoy them, so I just stopped getting them. So what year is that? 94? I mean, I was probably a freshman in college. So then I was also probably strapped for cash and being very picky about what books I was getting at that point. But I remember it coming out, and I definitely had the first few, especially number 1.
I actually did as well. I was reflecting on this and looking at all those covers brought back memories. I definitely had, if memory serves, I know I had number 1. I don't know that I had number 2. I definitely had number 3 with Scavenger on the cover, and I definitely had number 4 where they did their version of Superboy, the animated series. I think I had 3 out of those first 4 issues. I've talked about this before. Growing up, my parents and my mother in particular, they were very strict about how many comics I was allowed to get. There was always this fear that it was going to impact my schoolwork. And so I was always limited to the Superman books. I mean, thankfully there were 4 and eventually 5 of them. So each week I got the Superman book. Over time, as we got deeper into elementary school, that restriction relaxed a bit and I did start to get more. And even just the fact that I had those few Superboy issues leads me to think I would have been allowed. So for whatever reason, I don't know, maybe it just didn't speak to me. I don't remember specifically enough to tell you like, oh yeah, I didn't like it. I remember having them, but not moving forward with it. And again, I couldn't really tell you why.
And how old were you at that point?
94, 7.
Yeah. So it's funny. We're going to get to that because based on my reaction to issues 1 through 10, it would have definitely made more sense for you at 7 to read it versus me at 19.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
But yeah, I mean, this had been this gap, and I wanted to close it, and we just reread Reign of the Supermen with a specific focus on the future Connor Kent, and I just had such a great time with those Kesel Grummett Adventures of Superman issues. So to finally close this gap and explore this run, I was really excited, and I have to tell you, I think I've gathered from our brief exchanges off mic and what you've hinted at already so far. I think maybe we had different reactions to this because I overall found this to be a really fun reading project. I had a good time with it with some caveats, but overall it was a fun ride. There were some things that really stood out and we will have to talk about, but overall I enjoyed it. It sounds like your enjoyment was a bit more muted. Fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say. That's fair to say. I can't say I enjoyed it. I also wouldn't say I hated it, but I think I'm fine now having read it, and that's all. I don't think I ever need to read it again. But yeah, I think like you, it filled a gap for me, and I think I enjoyed the back half definitely more than the front half.
Okay, so, interesting.
Yeah.
So we're calling this episode Hero of Hawaii because this is the run that establishes what became his status quo for some time, where he sets up shop in Hawaii with his supporting cast, most of whom carry over from the Superman titles at the time. We have Double X, his supervisor from Project Cadmus. I love over the course of the issues how increasingly comfortable Double X gets in his island environment. And he's in his flip-flops and tank tops and whatnot. It's great. And of course, his morally dubious business manager, Rex Leach, and Rex's daughter, Roxy Leach, who has, I think, a pretty interesting arc over the course of these issues, where she ultimately joins the police academy with an eye towards becoming part of Hawaii's budding SCU. And of course, we have Tana Moon, who had departed the Superman titles before Superboy. And the big shock in the first issue is that she's on Hawaii, where she's originally from. And she's a core part of the cast, and she and Superboy embark upon a romantic relationship. Right. More to say on that in a second. Overall, what I liked about this was the world building aspect of it, I suppose. Not in a mythological sense like some of these other, fantasy stories and whatnot that we might be talking about, but just in terms of carving out a specific place for the character. This has come up in numerous episodes recently, and I know you're plugged in more than I am to the current Superman titles, and I still remain really torn on the size of the Superman family in the current Superman titles that are being published now, and the fact that they're like all based in Metropolis. And I look at the books of this era coming out of Reign of the Supermen, where you send Superboy to Hawaii, you send Steel to DC. It's like, yeah, man, give them their own space and their own lane. So I love this distinct setting for the character, and there are a bunch of new villains that are introduced over the course of these issues. Knockout and Sidearm and Scavenger and King Shark, who previously had been an Aquaman villain, I believe, right? And then there was kind of
King Shark. No, he previewed here. This was his first
this was his debut. Okay. So I feel like overall, while some of the villains were more effective than others, it's still like I appreciate the intent, right? And the attempt to be additive and not just kind of pluck from the Superman world, right? And they just happen to be in Hawaii. It's like no. Like they really tried to build out this new rogues gallery, and to whatever extent it worked or didn't work, the attempt was there, and I really do appreciate it. So that's like big picture, kind of what really jumped out at me.
That's cool. Yeah, I would agree too. I mean, and we've talked about the idea that there's just too many supers in Metropolis, but I do like this era. Like if you think about across the DC universe, I would say, I mean, every hero had their city until Hal Jordan didn't have a city. But everybody had a place to be. And that's why I think it's a little bit nice with this, where Superboy has Hawaii. But I guess I don't fully understand why we're back to now everybody's in Metropolis. So maybe that's going to change over time. Maybe that's going to shift over the course of the All-In stuff going on. But I do feel like Joshua Williamson has a real, like he's got 2 feet both planted inside the 90s. Like you could tell he's bringing things back from the 90s. So who knows? Maybe it's going to split up again.
Maybe. How do you feel about the Hawaii setting? Like, do you like this as a locale for Superboy?
I think it's fine. And I don't think we've ever, like, in my knowledge, I don't think we've ever had a hero based out of Hawaii, or for that matter, even visiting Hawaii really very often, which is kind of cool. I mean, it also brings a lot of different culture to the book, a lot of folklore and mythology from that, which is really neat. And again, it never came off as cheesy to me, as far as like, no, they're trying to go for authentic new villains and heroes, which is kind of cool. So that was not what I had a problem with as far as the book. So
yeah, I like the Hawaii setting as well. I mean, like on the one hand, there's no connection point, but on the other hand, the book forges one, right? Like now you have this connection between Superboy and this place. I mean, what would a connection have been if you had put him in Smallville? I mean, we'll eventually get there in the Teen Titans, Jeff Johns era. So the fact that they just really charted something new for him, and look, it's this gorgeous tropical paradise. So it tracks that would be appealing to this 16-year-old who's excited to see babes in bikinis. And again, I think it did allow for them to kind of populate it with a character like Silver Sword, for example, right? That museum curator who's interested in Hawaiian history and culture, and then he gets this material, Animetal, I believe it's called.
It's almost like the T2000 kind of metal that just morphs onto him. Did you catch, which I didn't? Maybe I wasn't meticulous enough, but did you catch the reason as to why Superboy is in Hawaii specifically? Was that just did they say ever why he was going to be there, or what was the purpose?
So in his final issue in the super titles was Adventures 506. That's where he finally embraces the name Superboy after many weeks of don't ever call me Superboy. And then he also gets some information about how Cadmus was able to create him. And then he decides to go on this world tour to establish the Superboy name and merchandising rights and whatnot. So essentially they're on their world tour when the solo series picks up, and they're in Hawaii and they encounter this sidearm villain and he's pulled into battle. And then I guess essentially why he stays, probably Tana Moon has the biggest role in that decision. So I think it's just like they're on this world tour because they are exploiting the Superboy name and likeness for revenue through Rex Leach and whatnot. And then of course they end up setting up a permanent base of operations there.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah. I guess I have maybe my last sort of big picture question. This is kind of on the brain because over on our Patreon show this very month, we're doing a trilogy of episodes discussing the Ron Marz, Darryl Banks Green Lantern run starring Kyle Rayner.
It's awesome.
And hopefully people have been listening and enjoying, but whether or not you have, kind of my big takeaway reading most of those issues for the first time. And I think it's an apt comparison because we're talking basically the same period of time here in the mid-90s.
It's the first time you've read them.
A lot of them. Yeah. I had only ever read kind of
Oh,
like the last third of the Marz run, but the first 2/3 were new to me for the
really?
most part, with some exceptions. But uh,
That's cool. I
yeah.
love that run. I'm a big fan of that run.
Well, that's the thing. I was so impressed with those issues and the character focused approach and
Mhm.
getting to spend so much time in Kyle's head through his narration. And a comparison that I made, and I know for people who know the series, this is going to sound like really really high praise, but I think it's earned here. It reminded me in certain respects of the James Robinson Starman series, which to me is just an all timer magnificent
Mm.
series. But Mars's approach to Kyle like struck a similar chord with me, where I just felt like we were really the character was driving the
Yeah.
story more than the plot or the villain of any issue. So it was just kind of one of those things. I know sometimes people paint with a broad brush and talking about 90s comics. There's amazing 90s comics that are out there,
Oh, yeah.
right? And so now shifting over to something like this,
That's my beef.
it
Yeah.
doesn't, to me, it doesn't rise to the level of what I saw in those Green Lantern issues that were essentially concurrent. I still enjoyed it. It's not like
Yeah.
I hated them or anything, but having just gone through that other 90s run and kind of seeing what comics of that DC superhero comics of that time with a young
Yeah.
hero charting a new path, I saw what we're capable of. And I just don't think we got all the way there. And I'm still trying to kind of figure out, well, why exactly? And part of it might be that lack of internal monologue. I'm not saying that every single character, every single title always needs it, but I don't know. There's something about it that just kind of lets you in. And when you don't have that, it's sometimes, for me at least, it can create a little bit more of a distance. Was that something you longed for at all? Or did you feel like that wouldn't really have a place in this book?
Well, I guess one of my biggest complaints is it just felt very surface. It didn't feel very deep. It felt almost if it was like an adventure sitcom at times. And I think that's what was kind of grating on me. So if we're talking big picture, I got to ask you a small question first, because it kind of, depending on your answer, it might lean my opinion a certain way. How old do you think Superboy's supposed to be?
He's 16.
Okay. How old is Tana Moon supposed to be?
Okay. I'm with you. I think we're in lockstep
So
on
you know
this.
where I'm going, right? Okay, so
Yeah.
that's one thing.
Yes. How old?
So-
Okay. Let's answer these questions because these are important. So Superboy is 16. Like this, I mean, he's
Yes.
technically weeks old, right? But he was sort of aged up to the equivalent of 16. Tana Moon, we're never, in these issues at least that we looked at, we're never given an explicit age. However, she's clear, there's a reference to, I was trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, right? Maybe she didn't go to college. Maybe she was just a real go-getter, and out of high school she got a job. Well, I know I'm still, but I'm like I'm grasping at straws here. But there is a reference because she talks about how she lost her Hawaiian like slang, right, for journalism school. So
right.
I think it's pretty clear that she's out of college.
Yeah.
So 22, 23. How old do you think Knockout is? So Knockout, for anyone who might be a little unfamiliar, this statuesque, vivacious redhead, this exotic dancer who we ultimately come to learn is one of the female Furies of Apocalypse who escaped and came to Earth. And she really sets her sights on Superboy and becomes a fairly prominent presence in the books, certainly in the biggest arc that we read, which is called Losing It. And it's the last 6 issues that we read. We'll talk more about it, but I mean, what age would you place her at if you had to guess?
Oh boy, old enough to make me concerned about how well they drew that character. They didn't talk about like 90s females stereotypical drawing. I was like, okay, like it was just a lot. It was a lot, and it was. Definitely. She's got to be mid-20s at least.
And how old do you think Roxy is, Rex's daughter? She's also at least 18.
I would say. I thought she'd be 22.
So
it's so weird to me. That's why. So that's part of it, Anthony. So part of it is he's literally a boy. Like he's a teenager. So let's put a pin in all the weird, creepy female stuff. If my brain is thinking this is a 16-year-old, the way this book is written, especially what we read, and mostly 1 through 10, this comes off as a teenage kid book to me. Like, you could tell by the dialogue, you could tell by the very surface story and action going on. You could tell by the really clearly misogynist way of drawing females. Like, it was definitely aimed for teenage boys. So I was just turned off by that immediately, and it makes me also kind of wonder, this is probably why I didn't want to read this when I was 19 or 20. Because I was like, no, like, I'm used to these kind of books. I like young adult and adult style comic book reading and writing. This is dumb. I'm not going to read this. So look at it through that lens. That's why I'm like, I don't dislike this. I don't love this, but it definitely goes into a certain box for me.
Okay, interesting. No, I hear you. So did it feel kind of juvenile to you?
Very.
Did you read Young Justice at the time, which started a bit of the way into this series, obviously? But did you read that?
A little bit, but I think that was just better written.
I don't disagree. That's why I bring it up to kind of get that baseline. So I get what you're saying, right? It's not just that, it's a young character, but in terms of how everything is presented.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I just kind of expected more from Kesel, actually. Like, and we're going to talk about the art, because that I could be really positive about, but it just seemed like it was an extra book he was thrown on and he had to get done. It just didn't seem like there's a lot of care for how I looked at it.
See, I'll play devil's advocate. I didn't get that sense, but in terms of the vibe that they were going for and who they were trying to appeal to, there might be something that was a bit amiss there. But I don't look. I mean, I got the sense that there was care. I just think that maybe in terms of the execution and the intended audience, and I don't know. That would be a good question if I ever have the opportunity to interview him, of like,
because I really like him. I really truly like his work. It just seemed, I don't want to say he's phoning it in, but if he's told, like, hey, make this a teenage book, there's definitely going to be a different approach he's going to take as far as the dimensional approach to character, right?
Yeah. Well, and one of the reasons I bring up Young Justice by Peter David and Todd Knock, it's like, that, and I'm on the verge of a reread of at least part of that for this event, but based on my memory of it, because I read the whole thing back in the day, that there was a more sophisticated, nuanced approach to the characters and dynamics. That's my memory of it, at least.
And that's, I mean, you said Peter David, like that. There's been books that I haven't liked by Peter David of mainstream characters, that because I think it was too dense and too thick and heavy into it. But yeah, I think when Jeff Johns was writing like Titans and those kind of things, it was definitely a teenage book as far as character and vibe, but it didn't treat them like teenagers. It treated them like, we're going to treat you like young adults, because that's what really teenagers are almost, right? So it just felt like Superboy was a very immature book. That's what kind of threw me off.
I hear you. Okay. No, that's fair. I mean, it's one of those things where, it doesn't necessarily feel like, I mean, you have the same creator, so there's connective tissue, but at the same time, It doesn't feel like, the fifth monthly Superman title, right? It does feel like its own thing, which goes both ways, right? On the one hand, and maybe that was a mandate that they were given. Like, we really want this to stand apart. We want to try to tap into a different audience. I don't know. I will say there was one issue that genuinely made me laugh, and if they had been able to achieve this more, maybe I would have gotten even more mileage out of these issues. But the fourth issue, where Superboy is laid up with clone plague, and Rex comes in with the special advanced look at the pilot for Superboy, the animated series. And all of those scenes are drawn by Mike Parabek. So it's a very distinct, very animated style. And you're watching this, and clearly Rex has positioned the character based on him as this, like, this ripped, wonderful protagonist who gets all this screen time. He has more hair than he does in real life. He's really taken a lot of very generous liberties with his character. And that made me laugh. Like, that was genuinely funny. There really wasn't, and I'm not saying it has to be a comedy book, but at the same time, if you're really going to lean more into the lightness of this and go for that humor, it's really got to be funny. And so that was an issue where it really made me laugh. I didn't really feel the same with really any of the rest of it.
Well, and if you approach it from, okay, this is DC's approach to, we want a super book that is a teenage book. I mean, let's say they're going that route, this is a good way as a jumping on point for a kid who maybe hasn't read comics, likes the super family idea, likes the Superman idea. He's reading Superboy. All right. After a few years of this, okay, I'm going to check out Action Comics and Man of Steel and those books that are happening right there. I think that makes sense. I guess I didn't even feel like the Superboy character was what I liked about him from the main titles. Like, I feel like it seemed a little more immature than I wanted it to be, even if it was a teenage book. And I guess for lack of a better phrase, I just didn't like the character as much to read it more. I think that's the thing for me.
Okay.
This version, this early version of Superboy. Now, as he gets older and he's more Connor, then I'm liking that a lot more. But again, different writers, older, different vibe.
Yeah, I know that's an interesting aspect of all of this, because we're also reading this from the perspective of, we know the depth that will ultimately be added, the additional layers, the name, right? He'll get Connell, he'll get Connor. We'll see him forge all these relationships. Yeah,
he's older, like he should be, like any adult or young adult. You're growing, like, so. Again, I'm not upset about the book. It's just not a book that I would gravitate to because of my age, right? Like, it filled a gap, but I was like, oh, it just seemed like a lot of fluff that I wasn't. If it wasn't for this assignment, I don't think I would continue digging into it, like, so I'm not unhappy that you made me read it, but it did give me like, oh, okay, so that's where the character started, because I really like where the character went, even having not read this before.
I'm curious to get to the second Kesel Grummett run, because, like I said, I've already read that, and when they come back, they go full Jack Kirby. I mean, they lean real hard into that, and at that point in time, Superboy is operating as an agent of Cadmus, so we have a shift. Right. So I wonder if some of these things that we're talking about, maybe that won't be as much of an issue at that point.
Maybe I'll like the back half. Maybe I would enjoy 50 through 100 more, because I did enjoy
the hypertension.
Thank you. Yeah, the hypertension one.
Yeah.
So that could be it.
And that also was surprising to me, because having read their second run and knowing how Kirby infused it was, you go back and you look at this, and really, other than when we get to the Furies and this backstory about Knockout, we're really not in that Jack Kirby fourth world territory. Right. So it felt to me very, very separate from the other run of theirs that I'm already familiar with. So no, I get where you're coming from on all of this. I wonder too, if part of this tension that we're experiencing, again, less so for me, but I get what you're saying, is the fact that, with limited exception, namely when Superboy is forced to enroll in public school by truant officer Mac Harlan. Did he remind you of anybody? Or he might have been in the issues that were in the middle part that I know you didn't get a chance to.
Oh, maybe. Yeah.
But it was Mike Carlin. He looked exactly like this truant officer who's giving Superboy such a hard time. A dead ringer for Mike Carlin, and the character's name here was Mac Harlan. But there are a few issues before the school gets demolished and they tell Superboy he has to be homeschooled, where he's attending high school and he makes a couple of friends, Robert and Hillary. And Robert has maybe the line of the run where he says because Superboy starts explaining, as he always does, about his tactile telekinesis. And Robert's like, do you think you could go one day without saying tactile telekinesis?
That's amazing.
So that also made me laugh, in fairness. That was another bit of humor. But there was an instance where you had him around peers. And so the reason I bring this up is that, and this ties in with where we were going with the romances or potential romances here, he's almost entirely surrounded by adults. And even characters like Tana and Knockout and Roxy, who could and arguably should have been brought down in age, they're adults too. So I don't know. And maybe that feeds into what you're saying about feeling like both the book and the character come off as so immature. Maybe part of that is because of how he's positioned relative to all the, I mean, I don't know if that would have made a difference, but it definitely stood out to me.
I think maybe the creep factor kind of seeped in a little bit too. I mean, you could have easily made Roxy similar age, 16, 17. I mean, Tana could have been like an intern. Like she could have been like a senior intern and getting experience in journalism, but they kind of screwed that up because I think in the actual super books, they made her older. Right. So it might have, I mean, I think the tone would have still been the thing that gets me.
Yeah.
But so if anything, the age of the girls just kind of creep me out more.
Yeah, we got to talk about this. So here's the thing. It's funny because I wasn't expecting this to stand out to me as much as it did. I'll be honest, because I went into this. Obviously, we had already met Tana in the Superman titles during Reign. And while I hadn't read these issues specifically before, I knew that there was more development with Superboy and Tana. I knew that Knockout was a thing. I had seen either articles or comments on message boards pointing out this pretty significant age difference between Knockout and Superboy and the fact that she's all over him. So I knew this was something that had been discussed, and I kind of went into this figuring like, hey, as always, we're here we acknowledge, we don't condone, we don't condemn. We recognize it was a different time. We recognize this double standard that still exists, right? Where you have a younger man and an older woman typically doesn't elicit quite the same reaction if it were flipped. You know, not saying that should be the case, but that's typically what happens. So I kind of went into this figuring like, all right, like I'm not going to harp on this, and also generally I'm not like easily offended by much stuff. I don't consider myself a prude. I'm like, yeah, whatever.
Right. Exactly.
But,
it's blatantly odd.
Like what's so odd to me, man, is that every single love interest of his is significantly older. And like we're saying, like, I don't understand why Roxy is the easiest. Like it really, I mean, other than her joining the police academy, but they could have made her a junior cadet or something like that. Like she could have easily been 16, 17. Tana, from the jump, they could have made her an intern, or like I said, they could have made it. She's right out of high school. She's a hustler. She's trying to get by, even though she doesn't have a college degree. So she's 18. I mean, still legally questionable depending on the state, but still it's like, all right, well, at least we're closer. And even Knockout. I mean, I guess with Knockout,
they could have made her like 19.
Yeah. Like I guess she has to be old enough that she could be working at the Boom Boom Room.
Oh my God. I forgot about that.
But what's so odd to me is just like, why? Why? I like, why?
Well, and that's my question. Well, and okay. So this is going to be kind of a creepy comment to make, I guess. But if they're aiming this for teenage boys, like, sadly, teenage boys are not always looking at their current age of girls in their class. They're looking at older girls, which is creepy and gross and disgusting because it's ridiculous. But if they're writing in that and they're thinking about that and how am I marketing this book, which again, kind of sleazy, but if that's the mentality they're going with, they're going to have Superboy's looking after older girls. He's not looking at girls his own age.
I guess I don't disagree with that, but I guess
it's just gross.
Where like him lusting after a gorgeous older woman, I get. I suppose it's the other side of this that I have the bigger problem with, because it's not as if not as if Tana recognizes like, hey, like kid, you got a crush on me. I'm 23, you're 16, and you've been out of a test tube for like a few weeks.
There isn't even that.
You know, like there's at some point there's some mention, but it's not something that's really discussed at length.
Right.
And so again, the fact that she like willingly embarks on this, like they're just full on making out and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then with Knockout in particular, I mean, she's all over him. The double entendres just flow constantly. Remarks about pulling out and she likes it rough and this and that. Again, it's all in the context of battle and how she's training him. I mean, when you get to the whole losing it arc, which overall I think was effective, but that whole thing is just like she keeps dangling, sealing the deal with him.
Yeah.
To string him like, so again, from his perspective, that's fine. I don't really have an objection to that because I think, that is kind of but it's the fact that we have these like fully grown women.
That's weird.
Who are all over him in this very like, blatantly sexual way. And it's all, I mean, with Roxy, I mean, even Roxy to a point, but I think we get to a point with her and I think this becomes more solidified. I think in the Marz run, it becomes a bit more of a sibling type thing.
Yeah.
But still, so I don't know. I mean,
I thought about it. So as I'm reading it and this kind of dawned down, like it was like issue 26, like almost towards the end of the run. I was like, wait a second. And I started running this through my brain and I compared it to like, okay, if my older daughter, Belle, who's almost 22, was even slightly interested in a 16-year-old boy, I'd be like, hold up, what's going on? No. What's going on? And like, that would not be okay. And she would never in a million years, but there should at least be some mention of it. Rex should at least say something about that to Roxy. It's just odd to me, man. So I don't know. It just put a weird ick on a lot of it for me.
It did for me as well, and mostly because I really can't make too much sense of it, other than what we've tried to surmise. And I don't mean to belabor the point, but it really stood. I mean, it's not like it was a couple of things here and there.
No,
it was a pretty, it's a pretty big theme of the run, I would say. And just to button this up, I suppose where I really butt up against it is just like, what was the purpose? Because they could have, like we're saying, they could have brought these characters down in age, and then you don't have that ick factor, and he could still be lusting after. You could still have basically the same dynamic. Yeah. Or if you are going to keep that age difference, you can at least make it a story point. I mean, I don't know. You would think, I know they get into a bit about, here's a perfect example. The news station that Tana's working for, they stopped letting her cover Superboy because of this conflict of interest.
Yes.
But it's never like, because you're robbing the cradle. Oh, but even that, the first time we see Knockout in the strip club, I don't think it's her. I think it's one of the fellow exotic dancers who says, like, they see Superboy on the news and she's like, I wouldn't mind rocking that cradle. It's like, what are we doing here? So if you're not going to make a story point out of it and get some mileage, like if that's why Tana, her career was derailed or she couldn't cover Superboy because they're like, hey, not only is this a conflict of interest, you're breaking the law. At least that's something. So it's just weird to me. I don't know.
So as we go through this, my biggest question I kept asking myself too was like, what's the point of this book? Like, what's the goal of this book? Like, where's it going? It just seems like for us, if you look at like Hypertension and where that character and beyond is, that's 60 issues in. That's 5 years of readers and books going out. It just seemed odd. Like I didn't know why this book and where it was going. So.
I mean, I'd be hard pressed to say what I perceive to be a clear mandate of the book or what the book was really trying to say about the character.
Yeah.
I don't really know. Let me ask you this. We mentioned how, to the book's credit, we do get a bunch of new villains, and really this attempt to flesh out a rogues gallery for him. We have this sidearm character who pops up a couple of times, and we also, in that 0 issue that followed 0 Hour, we get a flashback to Superboy's first night in Metropolis, and that was actually the first villain he encountered. So he's got this cybernetic arm and whatnot, and of course, Superboy constantly teases him and calls him all different other names that start with side. We've talked about Knockout. We have the scavenger who's tracking down all of these relics, starting with this spear in our 3rd issue here. Silver Sword, we mentioned, that museum curator who's imbued with this animetal. He ends up he has a return appearance right before losing it, and Superboy and Knockout actually help him get away. They recognize like the government had apprehended him and kept him underground for months and whatnot, and he was more misguided than outright evil. There's an encounter with Parasite at a certain point when Superboy's in Metropolis. We mentioned King Shark. There's another villain called, well, not even so much of a villain. This was more of a misunderstood, but BEM, this little little creature who can turn into all
Almost
these
like a
different monsters.
goblin-y kind of, can transmute into things, yeah.
Yeah, we get an appearance from Copperhead. There's a 3-part arc. Most of these are really just single issue stories. I mean, obviously the character-based threads continue, but largely single issue stories. But there is a 3-parter in the middle. This is right after, I know you read through issue 10 and then you jumped to losing it.
Yeah, it's okay.
But there's a 3-parter called Watery Graves where Inspector Makoa, the law enforcement person we meet on Hawaii, he is trying to track down this criminal cartel, the Silicon Dragons. And he calls the Wall, Amanda Waller, and they dispatch the Suicide Squad, which includes Knockout, Deadshot, King Shark, Sidearm, and Captain Boomerang. And Superboy has to work with them, and that was a fun
interesting
arc.
Okay,
yeah. We also see Loose Cannon, who was a Jeff Loeb creation. Where is he from? Was he in the Superman books at some point?
That's in a Superman book, yeah.
Okay,
and it was kind of like, I feel like, wasn't he like blue skinned or
yes?
And I feel like Loose Cannon came out of as early as that Bloodlines Bloodbath run in like 92.
Can I tell you, I've never liked Bloodlines.
Oh,
I've never liked it.
There's a few. It's a really cool idea as like a short series, but that's it's where there's parts that I like because it was also me formatively in like 8th grade reading those books. So.
Gotcha. There's an issue where Roxy goes back to Vegas to try to clear things up with this guy who'd been interested in her, and he's now donned this power suit and he calls himself Neon, and Superboy fights him. There's a 2-parter where the mob guys who Rex Leach owes money to let Rex off the hook for the money in exchange for Rex luring Superboy into a fight with this character called Champion, who is actually Valor, aka Mon-El, who's having some memory issues because of the lead poisoning. So there's that, which is actually a fun couple of issues. And then not long after that, we get a visit to our time from the Legion of Superheroes. This is actually a crossover with Superboy, Legionnaires, and Legion of Superheroes. That was fun because obviously we know, going back to pre-crisis territory, Superboy has a very long, firmly established history with the Legion. So to have our new Superboy have this experience with them, and they make him an honorary Legionnaire, and they give him a ring, like that was really cool.
And that harkened back to like number 8, like the 0 Hour stuff.
Yes, which I do want to circle back to. There's an Underworld Unleashed tie-in where Killer Frost is walking across Hawaii, absorbing heat and causing this extreme cold and snow, which of course Hawaii is completely unprepared for.
I might need to go. Now I can't believe I got to actually go back and look at some of these now.
Some of these are good. The Champion / Valor ones, those were pretty cool.
Okay.
There's another villain called the Technician, who's this tech-based villain. I might be leaving someone out, but generally those were the adversaries that Superboy went up against. Which one or ones did you find most effective? Were there any where you were like, oh man, like that's a great villain?
Oh man. Well, I was so interested by the King Shark one because I had never read the origin of where like King Shark came from. Because again, you see him, he's more almost comedy relief, like in the new movies, and really grotesque. Like it's really rough, but it was interesting because it almost felt like this cultural god kind of approach, the way they kind of told that story. It was really interesting to me. I dug that one. And then what was the other one I really enjoyed? You brought up. I don't know. I know the BEM thing was almost interesting. It felt like a little Mr. and Mrs. Piddlet kind of vibe too. Like it had a misunderstanding, but like he's a little more snarky, but this was, he wasn't really a villain, but more of a happenstance.
Right.
But yeah,
that one was intriguing.
And I didn't, so I'll go back and look at some of those other ones you talked about, because that actually, they hearken to that Triangle era vibe, like of all those one-shot villains and those kind of things in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, the business with Valor in particular, I mean, we're right out of pre-crisis because he, like I said, he's messed up because of the lead poisoning, and Superboy's solution, he remembers that Star Labs has this ability to access a quote-unquote stasis zone. And that's where they put Valor. Well, right out of Pre-Crisis, like with the idea of the Phantom Zone, where he was placed as this kind of stay of execution while he's suffering the effects of the lead poisoning. So it very much in that mode, which had I read this even just a year or so ago, I really wouldn't have made much of an impression. But now having, more experience with those classic Superboy stories, I was like, oh, okay, I see what they're doing here.
Well, then see, it is interesting too, as you're rattling things off. It's even more proof to me why this is probably a teenage book, because there's so many one-offs. There's so many one-shots. Like, they're not necessarily banking on somebody who's going to get the book month to month. They're going to see it on a rack and go like, oh, that's cool. And they don't need issue 13 and 15 to read 14. So the more you say that, the more it makes sense to me that my hunch was kind of correct.
Yeah, it's weird. It's hard to say, I guess, because we are dealing with a different era of comics, and it wasn't quite as serialized or arc based as it would become. And still, though, I was surprised that in 30 issues we had one 3-parter and then one 6-parter. So they did that very sparingly. What stood out to me was how, for the most part, at a certain point, the book really does stand on its own. Like I said, there's that Legion crossover, but for the most part, it stands on its own. But within those first 10 issues, the book very quickly got caught up in the Superman titles and other events, because I think as early as
milestone.
I think as early as issue 3, you have Superboy suffering the effects of the clone plague. So of course I had to go back over to the super titles and refresh my memory on what that was all about. But yeah, you had all of the clones of Metropolis getting sick and dying, and the Underworlders thought that Cadmus was trying to take them out. And so this led to all that war. And Lex Luthor II, his cloned body was deteriorating, and he starts blowing up Metropolis.
Was that the fall and battle of Metropolis, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I remember that run. There's an epic cover. I feel like Lois is like running down the street with a globe, like
Action 700. Yeah. That's a classic. It's so good. But if memory serves, I think ultimately the source of the plague was fallout from Engine City. That's what was making them sick. And Guardian's blood was the cure, because he was grown differently. And so he ends up donating like an almost deathly amount of blood, and Superboy becomes test patient 0 and he survives and all of that. But, you have those not first couple, but issues like 3 and 4 3, 4, and 5, where he's pretty sick in his own book. And then 6 and 7, he's off in Metropolis. He's fighting Parasite. Then he gets caught up in the Worlds Collide milestone crossover. Then we're right into Zero Hour. Yeah. But then we're right into 0 Hour. So you had a big stretch there where he was really kind of swept up in the other goings on of the DC universe.
So, I mean, again, I think, I hate saying this, I do feel like it was a good filler book. Like it was like they were using the other books to get you to also look at this book a little bit too.
Fair to say that a highlight of this Kesel Grummett run is the 0 Hour issue, where he encounters a time/reality displaced pre-crisis Superboy in Smallville.
That's one of my favorite issues of the whole thing I read. It was great.
What'd you like?
Because it was, he was so confused too. And even like when he's addressing Lana, he's like, wait, you look different.
You look old.
Yeah, she's old. She's older, dude. Like, she's not a kid anymore. She's married. She's got a house, like all that kind of stuff. He was just that sweet pre-crisis Superboy. Like, it just seemed like, what's going on? Why am I here? Why is everything different? And then how it's changing everything around him. Like the shops are changing to like the pre-crisis vibe. And I just thought it was clever. Again, it worked out perfectly because it was a 0 Hour event, but it was a neat way to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things, I think, if you're going to introduce a new Superboy, right, it's only natural at some point you would want to see him come face to face with the original classic iteration. And even just to see Tom Grummett get to draw both of them was such a treat. That's definitely a favorite issue of mine. I think the two things that stand out to me about it, and we've talked about this before in different episodes, but that issue generally, but what really stood out to me this time, one, when pre-crisis Superboy is getting confused and agitated, right? Because again, he sees this older Lana Lang who's married to Pete Ross. And it's so tragic because for him, obviously this is the girl he loves now grown up and with someone else. But even from Lana's perspective, because this Clark says like, you'll always be the girl for me. And that's not what the post-crisis Lana got from her Clark.
Right.
So that was very tragic. But his growing frustration, now obviously he calms down
Yeah,
But there
but
was a moment there where I said to myself, oh, this is like a forerunner of Superboy Prime.
that's exactly what I was thinking. I loved it because I was like, oh, is this where he starts to get pissed off?
Right. Like maybe
Yes.
Jeff Johns read this issue and he was like, yeah, like what if Superboy went crazy?
Oh, what if that happened?
Yeah. And then the other thing is that this is where Connor, the future Connor, meets Ma and Pa Kent briefly.
Yes.
The farm when they come out, which was nice. And then there's also a moment there where Superboy asks Double X, like, who was I cloned from? Who was my genetic parent? And he's like, I don't know. But that was just interesting because we don't get, there's that question about his genetic parentage. And then in the 0 month issue that follows, we have Emil Hamilton pops up in Hawaii visiting Star Labs, the Star Labs branch there. And he wants to study Superboy. And then we get the sort of the flashback to his first memory, like waking up in that container and everything. But, that's about it. I mean, there's not that much backstory or mythology there. I know for a lot of those 0 month issues, they had, continuity to sort out or whatnot. That, really wasn't as much of a factor here, but
poor Emil Hamilton. I like that character. I always feel like they kind of did him dirty.
I agree. They did. I mean, this guy, remember that whole stretch in the Triangle books where he was stranded at the fortress?
Yes.
I think it was during final night and Superman had no powers. He couldn't get him back. He's just like hanging out at the fortress.
Great character. He like made Star Labs a real place. And they just did him dirty. Was that Ruin? Was that?
Mm-hmm. I know. Oh, I got to tell you though, coming out of that 0 issue, I could not stand those freaking visors. The specs, the X-ray specs, those glasses that Hamilton makes for him, that give him all the vision powers. I didn't like the way they look. And I'm also just like, if you're going to beat us over the head with this tactile telekinesis, just do that. Just do that.
Yeah.
I was happy when those were lost and then they came back and he destroyed. I'm glad because that was really kind of getting on my nerves. I don't know why they really bothered me.
Well, it was... Yeah, I'm with you. It's like, just make him different. He doesn't have to have all the other powers. Yeah, it was just weird, man.
Jeremy asked me this last week, and let me pose the question to you. How I know this has come up in other discussions, and in fact, I think when we talked about House of Brainiac, this was a point of a bone of contention for you. But yeah, I mean, generally, how do you feel about the tactile TK?
I guess I don't know because I feel like they keep talking about it, but they never use it enough. I never felt like I felt like they never did enough with it for me to give a crap. I guess I don't know why they went that route. Like if it's a clone, why would they go that route, but then want so badly to use the other powers? I think it's a neat idea, but I also think it limits him. I think it's very, very limiting. So then they're like, oh, I realize we can't just constantly use this all the time. But I don't know, man.
I don't mind it. I guess I just, I think what I'm landing on is that I think there's a problem if you have to explain it this much.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem. To that character's point, it's like not an issue goes by without him having to say like, well, I have tactile telekinesis. So it's like, if it's not something that could be conveyed visually, then maybe we need something a little bit different. I don't know.
I don't know. Can we talk a little bit about the artwork?
Oh my, of course. Tom Grummett, the unsung hero of
he really
90s
is.
Superman comics.
I feel like everybody automatically goes, now listen, I love Dan Jurgens. Like, he is my boy. Like that, so much of what he did in Superman is like what my brain goes to. But Tom Grummett, like if he's a close second, because if you read through all of the Death of Superman and all that stuff too, oh my gosh, you forget how good he is. And that the fact that he was on this book for 10 issues and then he came back, like it was helping me be okay reading the book.
Well, that's it. So he was on, so for these first 30 issues, he was there
1 through like 8.
Yeah, no, I mean, there were a couple of fill-ins here and there. No, he was there very consistently until, and this was the thing that broke my heart. I mean, there were fill-ins here and there, but he was generally on the book until the Losing It arc, where he did part of part 1 and then part 6. And then we had fill-in artists and even a guest co-writer. I don't know what was going on. Maybe they were jammed up with other super stuff at the time, but it broke my heart because, not to disrespect the artists who filled in, but it's like we love that Tom Grummett art, and especially for their only 6-issue arc. It's like, come on. That was frustrating.
Well, yeah, he did 1 through 8, and then Ramos took over, which I didn't. dislike, but I was trying to put my finger on what it reminded me of, and it did. Ramos's work looked a little more like an Image book.
Okay.
It had a little more like 90s scratch and edge to it. But I literally wrote in my notes under number 30, Grummett is back, thank God. So
Yeah, no, it makes a
it is
difference.
so good. It does make a difference. And I've always said that there's just certain artists that it will make me not buy the book. And I hate being that way. But if I'm reading a graphic novel or a comic book, I need to connect with the artist too. It's not just the story.
Yeah. Now, I know we talked about this budding rogues gallery that's developed for him. We've mentioned all the members of the supporting cast, but I'm just curious, romantic aspect of it aside, I mean, of the supporting cast that we're working with, do you like this group? Do they work for you? Who stands out? What doesn't work for you? Just curious your thoughts on this crew.
What you said earlier, I liked the growth they were trying to put into Roxy.
Yes.
I think she started off kind of annoying. And then I think she was starting to pull away from her dad, and you started to see that even she found her dad obnoxious. And then she wanted something of her own. And you just started seeing that growth.
Yeah, Roxy's development was great. Do you know, so two things about Roxy. She smokes, which is what it is, but her bad grammar really grates on me. You know? A lot of double negatives and whatnot. But it's okay. I've ultimately found her endearing, especially when you factor in her father and what she's grown up with. And you see this jealousy with respect to Tana and Superboy's relationship.
Right.
There's a great moment, though, where Knockout is training, quote unquote training. I mean, there's one issue. I might be in Losing It. I think it's in Losing It, where Knockout starts doing a striptease for him. I mean, it's mostly, we only kind of get the setup for it and then the issue ends, but it's like she's giving him a private. Anyway, but she's also training him with his powers. And there's this moment between Roxy and Tana who are like, at the same time, they say, I hate her, referring to Knockout. And so it's like this unlikely moment of bonding between the two of them, which was nice. But yeah, her deciding to get interested in law enforcement and go to the academy, and also all this business with Makoa setting up an SCU in Hawaii, and they bring in Dan Turpin to help make the case for it. Like I thought that was great, and because it had been established in the Superman books that this SCU in Metropolis was becoming a model that was emulated in other parts of the country. So I thought that was great. You know who I had the biggest problem with? I think Rex.
Yeah.
Because here's my problem with Rex. It's one thing if he's a little sleazy, a little opportunistic, but he's got a heart of gold. He could count on him when chips are down. That's not the case. No. Or if he were funny or charming in any respect. That's not the case. No. Or if Superboy eventually wises up and kicks him out, which maybe that's coming in upcoming issues, but it doesn't happen here. So it just sort of feels like this guy is the worst. And why is everybody indulging him?
Why do we keep him around?
Yeah. So I kind of hit a wall with that character. I won't lie.
Yeah. I don't know. I forgot and I enjoyed, I know we haven't really gotten to Losing It too much, but I did enjoy over the course of the time, like other characters from Metropolis coming in, especially 28. I liked when Supergirl shows up.
Yeah.
Like that was a highlight issue of the run that I read.
And she strips him of his symbol.
Yeah. She's like, no, you're done. And even her fight Knockout was pretty awesome. Like,
so on this note, we've been referring to Losing It, which is the 6-issue arc at the conclusion of the first Kesel Grummett run. And artistic inconsistency aside, I thought this was very effective. So the basic setup for this is that the Furies from Apocalypse, they come to Hawaii to try to take Knockout back. And there's this, huge battle, and there's a police officer who's killed in the battle. And Double X is able to use his mental abilities to pull the memories of all the officers who were there and kind of put together a composite image of what happened. And it reveals that Knockout basically shoved him into the death blow, the killing blow, right? And just kind of referred to him as cannon fodder, right? Like out of the way cannon fodder. So the police go to apprehend her, but Superboy stands by her side, because even though she was initially set up as this antagonist, there were times where she helped. And obviously there's this heavy sexual component. So more of a Catwoman type situation, right? Not like an
Yes.
outright, enemy of his. And she'd been
Right.
training him and whatnot. So he stands by her. He doesn't believe she could have done this. And they go on the run together, like Bonnie and Clyde style.
Yeah.
And then eventually, like you were saying, you have Supergirl who comes into town and battles it out with Knockout, and really has this whole bit about the symbol and how Superboy is tarnishing it and not living up to the name. And she takes it from him, which I thought was definitely a powerful moment.
She also talks about like learning from her Lex Luthor relationship.
That was so good.
I
So
was like,
good.
oh, like they actually brought that up. That's awesome. And it was kind of good because I think that did a little bit snap into Superboy as to like, hey, get it together, dude. Like I've seen this movie and it doesn't end well.
Well, and Superboy eventually does snap out of it when Knockout, who consistently calls him pup, commands him to kill. And Superboy will not cross that line. And he finally snaps out of it. The reason why I liked this arc so much is it would have been easy to make it that Superboy was under some sort of mind control.
Right.
If he had been affected by something, or if Knockout was doing something to him. I mean, she was, but not anything that was like supernatural sort of thing. And so because I think it would have been easy to go that route and give him that out, but they didn't. And so it was really just, he was misguided. He was caught up. He was swept up in his feelings, and he was led astray, but then he ultimately did the right thing in the end. And even at the climax, he's prepared to really end the battle with great finality, but he can't go through with that either with Knockout.
Right.
And he brings her to be apprehended. But yeah, I thought I was pleasantly surprised with how that played out.
Yeah. I was surprised how much I enjoyed the last run of this because I wasn't really digging the opening. I was like, oh, okay. So I was more like, I wonder what happened in between 10 and 25. And you gave me kind of the short run, which is good, but you could definitely tell there's already growth as what was happening. But yeah. I mean, anything that has the Furies and Apocalypse and all that, like I'm in. Like we're good. And then Knockout starts praying a dark side.
Yeah.
At one point too, I was like, oh, okay, now we're really going deep in this.
Yeah. I mean, I'm hard pressed to say what, if any, arc Superboy really goes on over the course of this, or what growth is achieved. I mean, he does show some maturity when he agrees to go to school. That was a moment that stood out. Right. And like I said, everything in losing it when he eventually, kind of snaps out of it. And even then, why I give them a lot of credit is they could have made Superboy's behavior more extreme in losing it in terms of what he's doing with Knockout, such that he would have to be mind controlled. But they didn't. They kept it in the realm of believability. He's not, he's not going so far astray where it's like, oh my God, there's no coming back from this. But, they are mixing it up with law enforcement and whatnot. But I thought they struck a good balance. But so like those were a couple of moments where I feel like, okay, you see the maturity, you see a little bit of growth, but big picture, I don't know. I don't know that I can really extract much more, to be honest. And I don't think it's for lack of looking.
Right. Yeah. The fact that I'm surprised we've even gotten an hour and 15 minutes in. I was like, oh, okay. I don't know. I was walking in going like, I love talking to Anthony, but I'm not sure how much I can do on this one.
We got 90 minutes out of a 2-minute Superman trailer. I was not worried about this.
That was a whole lot better than this whole run.
But I'm glad. I am glad that we read it. I appreciate you coming along for this ride. I mean, is there anything else about this chunk of issues that we didn't talk about that you wanted to?
Oh, I did like how there was a crypto.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, Bibbo's crypto, right? So going back to A Funeral in Rain, there are those puppies that woman throws into the river because she can't feed them, and Bibbo jumps in, and 2 out of the 3 are dead. It seems they're all dead, and then one starts barking, and so he initially names the dog Krypton. But when he brings the dog, to get the name tag, they don't have enough letters, so he becomes Crypto. And then I don't know if there's a moment in one of the Superman books where this is explicitly said, but on or off panel, Bibbo sends Crypto to live with Superboy and Double X because of all of the destruction of Metropolis, wants to get him out of there. And so in yet another instance of hearkening back to the classic pre-crisis Superboy, where we have a Crypto, albeit a non-powered one.
Right. But again, like I think you've turned me around enough just to the, as far as what I missed, that I will go back and look. I am curious to look ahead to the next 50. I'm not going to run, but I mean, at least I know that, okay, that's the gap that I wouldn't be upset learning more about, because that I've never read them. I kind of like you said, sometimes you kind of like that there's always something out there that you haven't read or seen yet. It's like, okay, good. I'll keep it out there and let it float around the universe until I want to add some more. So it's good.
This was a lot of fun. I appreciate you
Yeah,
coming along
man.
for the ride. I appreciate people tuning in. I mean, and I would love to hear from
Yeah.
people, because I wouldn't be surprised if there are a lot of people listening to this, not unlike us a few days
Yeah.
ago, who really hadn't explored this too much. And then, of course, I know
Right.
we'll have people who've read the entire series all the way through. But I'd be curious to hear from folks. But this was a lot of fun. Anything you want to share with folks? What's going on in the world of All Yeah Comics?
Oh, we had an amazing sale. We had an amazing fundraiser for the LA fires. So within 2 hours, raised $1,500.
Amazing.
So it was awesome. A lot of great sketch cover variants came in. It was just a fun time on YouTube Live, and it's just a fun community to be a part of. So yeah, it was a blast. So we're looking forward to what's coming up next, which is a big old free comic book day coming up. That's weirdly enough, not too long, not too far from here, about 2 months or so.
Yeah, right on. So if you happen to be near one of All Yeah's physical locations, make sure you stop in. And otherwise, of course, make sure you check out allyeahcomics.com and follow All Yeah on social media. So thank you, Bernie. Thank you, audience. And don't go anywhere, because right after this break, Mike Sangregorio is going to tag in and we'll do a bonus segment on the Ron Marz written run of the Superboy title. We'll be right back. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. My love of the TV series Smallville is well documented, and there's one Smallville podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring great insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode, and the podcast will continue with more great Smallville and Superman talk even after their series coverage concludes. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner, including Arrow, Star Wars, and more. We all love the big-budget superhero films, but the world of independent cinema remains a place of unbridled creative freedom and entrepreneurial spirit. Whether you're an independent filmmaker yourself or you just love movies, don't miss these New Jersey film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, and Round Reel in Bloomfield. Submission information for filmmakers can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and much more. Fat Moose Comics, established in 1982, is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Led by current owner Sean Hendricks, Moose has that rare, old-school comic shop feel and camaraderie, yet also remains a welcoming space for new fans. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you are in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. And now, joining me to discuss the Ron Marz written run of the Superboy title is our pal, returning guest, Mike Sangregorio. Welcome back.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Perfectly fitting to have you here, because you joined me for one of my Ron Marz Green Lantern episodes over on the Patreon show. You joined me to discuss the middle third of his run on the GL title in the 90s. And I'm very curious, we'll get more specifically into this, but just big picture, because you and I were pretty high on his Green Lantern run, and I'm curious how you felt his Superboy work here compared. Did it live up to what you saw over in the GL title? Was something missing? How did you find it?
No, I thought it was very good, actually. You know, I always think of Mars as like a solid, like, journeyman writer. Like, I don't necessarily know that he always hits the high highs of some of my favorite creators, but I can't think of a run I've ever picked up by him where I didn't enjoy it, you know, where I didn't feel like back in the day we would say, you know, get the money's worth out of the cover price. Really, my only complaint about this arc is that he wasn't on it longer. You know, I started it, and, you know, he does the classic thing of cleaning the, you know, clearing the deck a little bit of extraneous characters, and he whittles it down. He does the Betty Veronica thing, and then he really says, okay, this is what we're going to do, with the kid. And then as I was going through it, fill-in issues started popping up, and then it just kind of ends, and then it goes back to, I think, Carl comes back, and I was like, oh, well, that's exciting, because I like him more. This is his character. But at the same time, I was like, well, Ron was able to tell his story so long on the Kyle Green Lantern book. I was hoping for a little bit more here.
Agreed. And this was the first time that I was going through these issues. Had you read them before, or was this the first time for you?
No. So this is I think this might be a digging for kryptonite first. I have never read Superboy ever. Even the Joe Kelly issues when they came out, it had always been a blind spot for me. So I was quite excited to go through this for the first time.
Oh, okay. Okay. Very interesting. So as I talked about in the first part of this episode, I had read the back half or so of this series, but I had never read the first Kesel Grummett run. I had never read these Marz issues. And to your point, we're looking at the stretch from issues 31 through 49. Kesel and Grummett leave with 30. They'll come back with issue 50, but 31 through 49. And within that batch of issues, as you had mentioned, we have 2 Eddie Berganza fill-in issues. And then we have 4 issues written by Barbara Kesel, then wife of Carl Kesel. So yeah, in terms of overall output, it definitely doesn't match the volume of his Green Lantern run.
Yeah.
But it's still a good batch of issues here for us to talk about. I would say there were probably a quartet of major takeaways that I had, and I want to talk through them and get your take on it. Overall, to answer the question, I suppose that I posed to you, to me, this did not match the strength of his GL run. I felt that this was a proper continuation of what Kesel and Grummett had set up. It was not a radical departure. I feel like if you were on board with what had been set up in the first 30 issues, this felt like a pretty natural continuation of that. So I suppose kudos on that front. I assume that was probably part of the mission in taking over. But yeah, it just, I don't know. It didn't delve into the character the way that the GL run did with Kyle, at least from my perspective. But I still overall found it to be enjoyable. And there are a number of components introduced here, specifically the agenda and the clone match, that are key pieces when we look at the Connor Kent lore. It was interesting to see the beginning point of that. And then there are numerous artists that he works with, but I would say the most frequent artistic collaborator in these issues was a Spanish artist named Ramon Bernardo.
Mm-hmm.
How did you find the art in these issues?
You can take it or leave it. I found it to be very inconsistent. I never found when I picture the character of Superboy in my head, it's always that like first, from his first appearance type look. This didn't really define it in the way that I think like the Kyle Rayner run. It's like, oh, I can immediately picture him in all those poses, those great covers. Here, it just felt like, to your point, it was like, I don't want to say it was a fill-in arc, because I don't think that was the case. But when Marz is writing Kyle, like that's his character, right? And here it was kind of like, well, I'm picking up someone else's. I'm going to try to do something different. But it never, I don't know, the train never gets up to speed, I think I would say. And the art's part of the thing. Is like, I'm thinking back on it now, it's like even like some of the design work on Match and something, it's, I don't know, it's not, I don't want to say iconic, because I don't think that's what they were going for, but it's not maybe as memorable as some of the other stuff coming out, especially from DC at the time.
Absolutely. And this artist in particular, he was primarily known for his work on Disney comics, and he passed away just last year at the relatively young age of 59. So I don't wish to speak ill of the dead. I just don't think that art style was exactly the right fit for this book. That's kind of what I felt. And the fact that we did have multiple artists. So I think had we had an art style maybe more in keeping with what Grummett had already established, and if we had more consistency, I think that would have helped my overall enjoyment. But nevertheless, some interesting things at play here in these issues. You mentioned the Betty Veronica of it all.
I loved it. Yeah.
Yeah. We talked a lot in the first segment of this episode about Superboy's love interests and the wildly inappropriate age differences and whatnot. And certainly Roxy Leach's crush on Superboy had been established, but it really ramps up in the early part of the Marz run, there's a Final Night tie-in issue. And I got to say, credit where credit's due, because when you and I looked at his Green Lantern run, one of the things we pointed out was that Marz did a particularly good job with the tie-in issues to the larger DC events like Final Night and Genesis with Kyle. And I feel like this Final Night tie-in was effective on a couple of fronts. One, it does prompt the end of the world stakes, prompt Roxy to confess to Superboy that she loves him. And of course, he has to immediately dart off to rescue Tana, and that's heartbreaking for her. But it fuels this bit of a love triangle for a few issues before we get to, I think, a pretty interesting, satisfying conclusion to it. But the other thing that it accomplishes, the Final Night issue, and this solves a problem that I had in the first batch of issues, which is Rex Leach just felt so irredeemable to me. And moreover, I just couldn't understand why everyone's putting up with him. It felt like this is a guy who so clearly needs to be kicked to the curb. What are we doing? But this Final Night issue accomplished a lot for me and smoothed a lot of that over, because he has his own come to Jesus moment where he realizes what he's done and we're not done with his life. And this prompts a bit of self-reflection. And he actually departs the book for a while to try to get his life together. And when we get to that meltdown arc where Superboy is degenerating, he shows up, he offers to donate blood. He says Superboy's like a son to him. Yeah. Now, by the time we get to the very end of this batch of issues, the final Barbara Kesel written issues, he comes back, he's kind of up to his old tricks. He's got this roller coaster stunt that he roped Superboy into, but at least for a time, there was an attempt at some sort of rehabilitation, self-reflection, and I appreciated that. But yeah, the love triangle piece, what's your take on that?
I loved it. You know, I have not read that many Archie books, but obviously, you know, Stanley and John Romita inspired, I guess, for lack of a better term, on their run on Amazing Spider-Man, where it's like the main character, the young superhero, you know, has two gorgeous women of uniquely distinct hair colors, you know, who he has to split his attentions between, which is also, you know, a Superman Silver Age thing, right? Lana comes back, and Lana and Lois are always fighting for his affection. So I just liked it. I liked, you know, he clearly is very interested in Tana, and she's older, and part of her is like, I don't know about this, but she clearly is interested enough in him to keep it going. And then on the other side you have Roxy, who's like, no, I love you, and I don't have a problem saying that. It's a very true emotional connection. They're close in age, at least the age he's been I don't know, made to be, evolved to, whatever, however you want to term it. So that makes sense too, but it's also very honest, because it's like, it's not that he's not trying, it's the heart wants what the heart wants. So I appreciated all of that, you know, because it allowed it to lay it out in a very interesting way, where Roxy's like, no, you know what, I got a Legion flight ring, and, you know, I'm willing to put myself on the line for you, and you're the first person to really give my weird haphazard life focus. Whereas opposed to Tana, who's like, you know, I want to be a journalist. I want to be like Iris West. I want to be like Lois Lane. I want to be like all these other things. And I don't know how much I'm going to be able to do that while, you know, you're not even legally an adult. And every once in a while you're flying off to a mission you might not come back to. So I thought that was all great. And then, to go back to Rex, it was like, kudos to Marz for using his like questionable scumbag characteristics up until that point to really tell. You said a redemption arc. I would almost say just like the rest of the arc, right? Just to have the character come in and say, well, okay, you know what? Superboy never did kick him out, and as a result of that, Rex is able to look at his life and say, wait a second, what do I actually want, right? Because I got a celebrity, I got this kid to dedicate, he's done every stupid thing I could possibly want. Where am I? Oh, I'm not where I want it to be. Maybe I should take a second look at it. So I loved all that. And to your point, I've read a lot of Final Night tie-ins. This is one of the best ones. I mean, this is up there with Hitman. Like this, everyone feeling that like, we're done. We're not going to, Superman is telling us we're not going to make it through this. What do we do? Well, we're going to spend time with each other. And I enjoyed the heck out of that issue. I think I read it twice.
Awesome. Yeah, well said. And I like your take on the love triangle. That's a great way of looking at it. For Tana, Superboy is essentially a liability in a number of respects. Whereas for Roxy, he does prove to be a positive influence on her life. Also, in the first half of this episode, we questioned exactly how old is Tana supposed to be. And I put forth, she's got to be 22, 23, relatively freshly out of college.
23.
Yes, in these issues,
Yeah.
they explicitly say 23.
Okay.
So we have confirmation on that. So we were spot on with that. And we said plenty about those age differences. But as I was saying before, not only do we get this furtherance of the love triangle, which I think was effective, Marz got some good mileage out of it, but, and I know I'm jumping ahead, but when we get to the climax of that meltdown arc and Roxy donates blood, the blood that's needed to put Superboy's DNA back together because it had been unzipped or something to that effect.
Degeneration.
Yes, man. Shades of Ben Reilly right there.
There we go. I was living in, and they're friends. So
yeah. But the upshot of this is that they come out of it feeling more like siblings than potential lovers. There's more of this now familial bond based on what they've shared as a result of that process. And I just thought, look, it could have been perfectly interesting to entertain a relationship between the two of them. She's certainly still age inappropriate, but less inappropriate than Tana. But I like the payoff to this. It felt like a satisfying conclusion and a way to kind of move forward and not kind of get stuck in a sort of Archie, Betty, Veronica type situation indefinitely. So I found that satisfying. Did you?
I did, very much so. Yeah, no, I really liked it when, again, journeyman, right? He gets them to a situation where it's like someone's going to have to put their life on their line to save the kid. It's got to be someone who's close in age. It's them describing Roxy, and you see her immediately go, "Yeah, I have no hesitation about this. Let's do it. Let's see what happens." And for me, because having read a lot of this stuff for our various discussions, it kind of reaffirmed a theme that I noticed, which was, the kid is constantly struggling with his, am I real? Am I important? Do I matter? How much of me is me and how much of me is what was programmed into me? And I think it's funny that he constantly is able to reaffirm like the life of those around him. Like I was saying with Roxy and her dad, it's like they clearly didn't have this model life. So when they meet this kid who also doesn't have a lot going on, you see how they kind of build something together. And I love how in Hawaii he builds this little like, found family. It's a cliche, but it's a good cliche, right? He's got the dog that barely survived Doomsday. He's got Double X, an old Kirby character. There's a clone of the Guardian floating around. There's Tana, there's stuff, and it's just like, I love that people are able to surround this kid who, again, is questioning like his value. He constantly tells people he's going to become Superman, but it's just like, I don't know how much even he believes that. And you're able to see, how much worth he's able to give to those around him. And that perfectly crystallizes. And Roxy saying, no, absolutely put me into the untested tube. If I can save him, it's worth the risk. And it felt earned.
Absolutely. No, beautifully said. And I agree wholeheartedly. I guess I'd say the meat of this run and one of my other kind of core takeaways was all of this business with the rogue scientific group, The Agenda, and their operative Amanda Spence is introduced in Marz's first issue. She poses as a magazine journalist who's interviewing Tana about Superboy. And then it turns out she's part of this nefarious group. They abduct Superboy and they clone him and they create Match, the new and improved version, who I guess they're planning to make copies of and sell and have genetically engineered soldiers or whatever aim. So I was aware of the Match character. He pops up later in the series, and my understanding is I think he's still popping around the DC universe, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
He's
Superboy's Bizarro is how I've always read it. So, I think he had an earlier Bizarro, but as far as that's concerned, I think he's the main one.
Yeah. Well, actually, on that note, so this is so funny. Just all these conversations that we have on this podcast, what sticks in my head and what I forget. So during the meltdown arc, when Superboy's falling apart, Double X has a line where he's like, can we use the original Westfield DNA sample? And it stopped me dead in my tracks because I was like, wait a minute. I thought that Superboy and the audience, I thought we learned about Paul Westfield being the original DNA donor in Hyper Time later in the series. But it's mentioned here, and I'm like, well, when did we find out about this? Because again, it had been firmly established and reaffirmed in Marz's first issue when Tana's recounting how Superboy came to be, right? They're very clear, like, he's not technically a clone of Superman. He was cloned from human DNA from an unspecified donor and manipulated to look like Superboy, like Superman rather. And they were able to translate Superman's aura to create this tactile telekinesis, and that's what powers him. But it had been an open question. Who supplied that original DNA? We know later on we're going to get this retcon from Jeff Johns about Lex Luthor and all of that. But for now, this is kind of the vein that we're in. And so when I saw that line from Double X during Meltdown, I'm like, wait a minute, this is like 30 issues early. What's going on here? I was driving myself crazy. So special shout out to our friend in podcasting, Michael Bailey. I reached out to him and I was like, when did we find out about this? And he, within minutes, pointed me towards the 1995 Superboy annual, the year one annual. And in that issue, which is not on the DC app, by the way, that app, kind of did me in on that front, but I was able to find it through other means. But essentially, they discovered the original 12 clones because Superboy was experiment 13. And one of those original ones, so they're still in Project Cadmus, and one of them is essentially a bizarro version of Superboy. And so there's an altercation there. But it's in that annual that the audience and the characters finally discover that the original donor was, in fact, Paul Westfield, the former director of Cadmus. He gets killed by Dabney Donovan during the Fall of Metropolis storyline over in the Superman book. So by this point in time, he's just off the board entirely. But we finally get that bit of information. And the cherry on top of this is, as I was thanking Michael for this, he reminded me that when he came on this podcast about a year ago and we talked about the hypertension arc, I asked him in that very episode, hey, when did we learn about Paul Westfield? And he told me it was this annual. So I figure in another year or so, I'll be posing this question again. But anyway, we get the agenda, we get match, they duke it out. And then in a few issues, Superboy literally starts falling apart. It's disgusting. But essentially the process to clone him to create magic unzipped his DNA and he's falling apart. And everything culminates in at Project Cadmus. The Superman family comes in, which was great. We're in Electric Superman era. He's there, Steel's there, Supergirl's there. They're all pitching in. Ultimately, it's Roxy who steps in and donates that blood, and they're able to put him back together. The unintended consequence of this, though, is that his aging process is stopped. So I know this was a big part of the character for a period of time where he was unable to age past 16, and that poses numerous issues that I think fuels his Tana Moon breaking up with him. Anyway, I laid out a lot of the plot points, but your reaction, your impressions to the agenda match degeneration piece of this.
Well, I love the agenda because I love that they are perfect antagonists for him because they treat him like he is nothing, right? They say, well, we unzipped your DNA to get what we want from you, which is mass-produced super people that are within our control that are like commodified. And we didn't even think about putting you back together because why would we? You're just product. So it kind of, the agenda are people with an agenda. It's kind of on the nose, but it works because it's saying, these are antagonists who are basically an evil version of Cadmus. They're not looking out for him. They don't think he's anything more than what was created, and they reaffirm his worst fears. And then, they almost lead to his death. So I thought they were great. I actually particularly liked Amanda as an antagonist. I over this entire thing, she comes back much later in the Joe Kelly run, and I just like, for me, I feel like that's his arch rival because she's she's brilliant in her own way. She's cold. She doesn't see him as anything more than the product he is, but he keeps popping back up. And she's like, no. Every time she shows up, it's the worst day he's ever had. So I liked all of that. And then, I mentioned this a couple of minutes ago, but he's fighting clone degeneration. And as people know, my favorite comic book character is the Scarlet Spider, who was a clone of Spider-Man, who spent literally dozens of issues worried about clone degeneration, dealing with clone degeneration, not dealing with it, a bunch of nonsense. So to watch the kid deal with it here was something I was really excited about because in Marvel versus DC, Ben Reilly, the clone of Spider-Man, fights Superboy, the clone of Superman. So that's how I actually was introduced to the character, other than what is it? Superman 500, Adventures of Superman 500. What's the issue where he first premieres?
Yeah, in the epilogue to Adventures 500, and then
Adventures
501 is
500.
his like
Yeah,
full
yeah, yeah.
full debut issue.
Yeah, so watching the clones fight, and then later seeing that he also fought a generation, I thought that was great. But no, it worked really well. I found Match himself to be a little underwhelming, but I love the line when he says, "No, why would I care about that? I wasn't programmed to care about that." And you can see the horror in the kid's face, because it's like, oh man, someone could have made me like that. I could have just been a weapon and a plot to deal with Superman, or to deal with someone else, or to further the military industrial complex, or whatever it is they want to do. It's this idea of like, we're going to make you into something we can sell because we don't care about anything else. And you can just see the fear in him. It's like, oh man, there, but for the grace of God, I could be you. And now you're here, and you're going to die in this weird volcano, because that's what my life has turned into. But I thought that they were great antagonists. I thought he did a great job at giving, the hero of Hawaii a really good rogues gallery.
The aging being locked, that piece of it. I will have a better answer in our next episode or so. I believe that's ultimately resolved in the Sins of Youth event, the Young Justice Sins of Youth, because initially this is where the young and adult heroes of the DCUs like swap ages, but Superboy initially doesn't age up because of this lock. But then it's causing problems. Essentially, Clarion's spell and this anti-late aging part of his body are at war with each other. And I believe it's Serling from Cadmus who's able to kind of fix this, and then he ages. And so I think from that point forward, that's no longer an issue. But there is this period of time where he's perpetually a 16-year-old. And I guess what I found interesting about it, one of the things that I was thinking about over the course of all the reading that I've done so far of the kid, is it's like, I don't know, like why exactly is he doing everything that he's doing? What's the true driver? And when he is faced with the potential of never growing up, i.e. never becoming Superman, that really seems to have an impact on him. And not that it's never said at any point, but it really seems like that notion of one day taking over, it is a primary driver, and I guess accounts for a lot of why he's gone about what he has. So I just kind of appreciated it, just to kind of have it. Maybe I needed it spelled out a little bit, but I was saying to myself, he's doing all of these things, but like, why really? So I like that aspect of it.
Yeah, same. I as soon as I heard it, I was like, oh yeah, this furthers that central conflict of you were created for a purpose, and it's really the only purpose you have. And you think, you were created on the day Superman died, right? Basically. So one day if he retires or passes away again, you think you're going to be first in line, and you want to be worthy of this incredible honor, right? And then when you're told like, well, you're not going to age anymore, and then it's like, oh man, maybe I'm not going to be first in line, maybe I'm not going to be something else. But also, it's funny because he's 16. No 16-year-old in the history of civilization has ever made a good decision, especially when presented with bad news. So I like that he's immediately like, well, my life is over. I'm done. I can't figure this out. And he has this like weird fever dream about Superman telling him, yep, you're useless to me now. I can't do anything with you. So I thought that was great. And then, yeah, just very quickly, you mentioned the scene where the super family shows up to help. That page was my favorite page in the entire run, because it's so 90s, and I love it. It's an electric blue Superman. John Henry Irons, the Man of Steel, who's premiered in the same issue as Superboy, so he's not exactly a storied character. I don't even think the movie had come out. And then you have like Matrix Supergirl with her 90s hair, and it's just like this is how I met these characters. It took me back. I wish I had a poster of that to hang on my wall.
Yeah, it was great. And what I loved too was how Superman related to Superboy in discussing his relatively recent power change, right? In more than one instance, he articulates, I wouldn't have chosen these new powers, right? Like I wasn't expecting this, and I have to deal with it, and you will too. So I liked him relating to Superboy through that huge change that he was going through himself. The Electric Superman era, obviously we talked about it a lot in the context of the super titles, but yeah, it's always interesting to see that version. it's always interesting to intersect with that version of Superman in other titles, Morrison's JLA, of course, or an instance like this. And it's always one of those things when he popped up, you're like, oh yeah, like this was this was Superman at the time.
It's so funny too, because I mean, I don't know any of these guys personally, but I have to imagine you're writing a story at this time when he has the electric powers, and you've got to be thinking to yourself, can we punt this a couple months down the line? Because there's no way this is going to last. This is the one of the most iconic cartoon drawn characters, Superman of all time. We know he's going to go back to his old look. Can we just hold this off? And to Marz's credit, yeah, you're right. He uses that as part of the plot to say there is nothing within our control. We have to take the next steps. And again, it's him looking at Superman and saying, oh, this is one of the many reasons I do want to do what you do, because you're able to sit me down and talk me off the ledge in a very, fatherly or older brother way. The Clark is able to give the kid the type of speech that John would give Clark. And we're an entire generation before John Kent the second. So I love that scene. I love the type of things where Clark can sit him down and just be like, listen, this sucks, but we're going to get past it. We're going to get past it together. And you are absolutely not alone, regardless of how or why you were made. So
I agree. And on that note, one of the things that I'm struck by in reading now half the series is how little Superman there is in it. It's just interesting to me because I wouldn't have been surprised if there were more frequent popovers or moments like that. They really showed a lot of restraint, and I don't know if I don't know where exactly that comes from. If they were told like, hey, easy on the Superman, he's in 4 other titles, leave him there, give Superboy the space to grow. I think in story it does make sense because Superman did not ask to be cloned. And as we've established, and as the book points out repeatedly, he's technically, as of this point in time, he's technically not Superman's clone. They couldn't figure out Superman's DNA. So although he does bear the shield and Superman certainly, given him the seal of approval to be out there operating. But yeah, I mean, very little Superman over the course of this series. It's just interesting to me,
I read that as purposeful because Carl Kesel at least seems to have a love of the pre-crisis era, right? Like Cadmus was the old DNA project in the Jimmy Olsen issues of Jack Kirby's Fourth World. Guardian is a golden age character. I mean, there's a lot of love for DC history. And the same thing with Superboy, right? I mean, the original Superboy pre-crisis had his own title for 100 issues, maybe more. First appearance of Crypto, Lana, Pete, all this other, like a very rich world full of characters. And I feel like he was probably like, well, listen, I'm going to move my character out of Metropolis. I'm going to put him into a small town where the other characters don't necessarily need to show up, but can. And I'm going to see if I can build something on my own, just very much how back in the day, Superboy was his own property. He had friends in the Legion instead of the Justice League. He had Smallville instead of Metropolis, but, he was his own character with his own mythology that you knew he was going to grow up into Superman. Fine, whatever. But it was still fun to read. It was still very successful. So that's how I read it. It was like, can I make this guy live and breathe on his own? And 100 issues, I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at, even in the 90s, even when things were being artificially inflated. So I think he accomplished it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it was a purposeful choice and ultimately an effective one. And obviously we'll get to the chapter in Superboy's history here where we do have a closer connection to Superman, and he's living on the farm and he's wearing glasses and going to Smallville. We'll have all of that. But yeah, I like that there is this period in the character's history where he does stand more apart. So as we kind of wind down with the Marz piece here, I guess my last major takeaway was how these final issues, some of Marz's, but actually more particularly the last couple by Barbara Kesel, sort of really dismantle the status quo and the supporting cast that had been established over the course of the first half of the series. And I guess it starts after Superboy is permanently locked at 16 years old. He begins to behave, in Tana's eyes, I guess, more immaturely. There's a moment where he seems to be flirting with a Triad, aka Triplicate Girl from the Legion of Superheroes, in view of Tana. And then the issue where she ultimately breaks up with him, he takes her to the beach to have this heart-to-heart, but then he leaves her there to go fight Silver Sword. When he comes back, there's this note. By the way, Marz really likes the beach as a setting for these romantic heart-to-heart. Did the same thing with Kyle and Donna Troy in one of the issues we talked about. Yeah. So we have the end of that relationship. And then in the last couple of issues, before Carl Kesel and Tom Grummett come back, these Barbara Kesel written issues, like I said earlier, Rex comes back. He has this whole roller coaster stunt. It goes awry. Superboy gets struck by lightning and disappears. And I believe that will feed into the Last Boy on Earth arc that kicks off with issue 50. But in issue 49, everybody really goes their separate ways. Roxy is trying to track down Superboy. She's the only one who's looking for this kid. So credit to Roxy. But she calls Tana, and Tana's got a job offer off the island, so she's leaving. With Superboy gone, Double X has been called back to Cadmus. I mean, he'll continue to be a presence, but still, he's leaving as well. Roxy gets a letter from Rex that he's in trouble, so she's going to leave to go help him out. She entrusts Crypto with Hillary, one of Superboy's former classmates. So everyone really kind of goes their separate ways. And in fact, that cover, it's a very, very melancholy look at our group as they're sort of looking back at this Hawaii setting and leaving. So, and we know that when we get into the next chapter of this series, we're going to be at Cadmus. We're going to be really leaning into the Fourth World, the Jack Kirby stuff. So this really does feel, there is an era finality to this. And it really does feel like the Hero of Hawaii era for Superboy is drawing to a close. How did you feel about that and kind of these final issues here?
Yeah, I knew that the run was coming to an end, and I knew that Carl Kesel was coming back. And they were married at the time, so I imagine at some point she asked him, "Hey, where do you need him to end up?" And it was weird. It was weird when Roxy called the Batcave and got him on the phone, Batman, as if he was Robin's dad, and was like, "Hey, is Robin there?" And he's like, "How'd you get this number?" And she's like, "Don't worry about that. Is Robin there?" And he's like, "I'm hanging up on you now," or so something like that. And it was funny to me because it definitely felt like, all right, she should reach out to Young Justice. She should reach out to his friends or whatever, but we actually don't want to have them show up here because clearly him being missing is something that we're pushing to issue 50. But again, it reinforces what I said earlier about Roxy is like the kid gave her like previously shallow life with her questionable dad real purpose. And, she is gonna find him. He's not just something in her life. In a lot of ways, he is her life. And he wants to make sure that she's okay, and he wants to find her. And I bought it. Again, all those issues where Roxy had a Legion flight ring, I was like, if she's going to be her own superhero, I would read that miniseries.
Oh yeah, man. Right on. What have we not talked about in this stretch of issues that you wanted to, if anything?
The only thing I wanted to mention is I love Double X. He's an old Kirby character. He's great. He's almost got like a Martian Manhunter quality to him. He's got incredible psychic abilities. He looks not the most welcoming to human eyes. He's a weird creature trying to deal with himself in more of the Ben Grimm vein. But in Hawaii, right, he's able to teach the kid the classics and history and everything else. He's able to mask his appearance. And over these couple issues, he even gets a date with someone he met on the beach. And I thought that was great because, you're really trying to build up the entire supporting cast, including him. And you see him so nervous. And it's like, you're a, what's the term? Like a 12th level intellect. And I love watching him like be nervous to make this woman dinner. I thought, again, it was a very grounded take on this character. It's like I was created in a lab to be, a great psychic phenomenon, a creature that could only exist a million years from now, and here I am learning to make gazpacho for this native Hawaiian. So I really appreciated that, and I would have loved to have seen more of it.
Amen, man. I love Double X. Love the whole Cadmus crew. I maybe because I met them so early, right at the beginning of getting into all of this, but I've always had a soft spot for that crew. So I'm right there with you. And obviously we'll be spending a lot more time at Cadmus in the issues ahead. But as we leave this era of Superboy, the Hero of Hawaii era, for whatever it's worth, I love the Hawaii setting and the supporting cast and this iteration of the character. So thank you very much for joining me. My thanks once again to Bernie for joining me for the first part of this episode. Mike, you'll be back next time. We're going to talk about the end of the Superboy series. So more to come with this series, more to come with you. Audience, thank you as always for tuning in. Make sure you come back next time. And until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Support the podcast and receive exclusive content, including bonus episodes, by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Flat Squirrel Podcasts is home to Digging for Kryptonite and another exciting episode in the adventures of Superman. Please subscribe, rate, and review today, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all